So over the past year, I have overbought when it comes to stamps and dies and card making supplies to the point that you see all of that extra stuff there. Yeah, it hasn't even been sorted. And the problem with overbuying is that you often forget what you bought. And so some of the stamps that I purchase have been sorted and put into my regular stamp organization, but the others just have kind of been piling up. And some of this is things that I've purchased on sale or kits that I have been trying out because I've been wanting to do a lot more card making. And really, it's just a bit overwhelming. I've also overbought on the embossing as well as metal dies side of the card making craft. And so here I have majority of my dies and things put away, but I do have quite a bit that have been added to the collection that quite frankly, I need to use. I absolutely love card making. I love all these supplies, and a lot of them are versatile, whether for card making or scrapbooking and other projects. I've also delved into hot foiling recently, and I have a lot of hot foiling supplies that have now made their way to my stash. And again, I'm not using these things, and I really need to. So I'm starting an ongoing series as I add more card content to this channel, where I grab materials from my stash to make card projects. So for today's project, I'm using a clear stamp for Momenta that I've had in my stash for quite a while, some distress oxide ink, a die from Scrapbooking Cards Today, and a stamp set I've had in my stash from Hero Arts. Now, my intention for this series is to not only challenge myself to use these supplies, but to also inspire you to do the same. So whether you are creating cards or scrapbooks or other paper crafting projects, my goal is to help you and to inspire you to use what you have in your stash to create beautiful projects. So for today's project, I'm making two A2 size cards using, of course, the materials I just showed you to make some birthday cards for some friends and family members. So this card project involves stamping and heat embossing. So that's what I'm going to do first. Whenever I'm making multiple cards, I like to work as a process, step by step. So the first thing I'm going to do is heat emboss and color the images. I'll create the background and the sentiments and then assemble the cards. So I have my Misty stamp positioner, and I'm going to stamp multiple times this strawberry cluster, and then I'm going to color the image with Copic markers. I am using a powder tool because I'm heat embossing, and I want to make sure that that heat embossing powder only stays where I want it, which is why I'm using that powder, so that all the excess powder will just slide right off the paper. Now the paper I'm stamping on is from Catherine Puller. That is her smooth white cardstock. I absolutely love it, and it's perfect for coloring with any type of medium. I'm going to set that heat embossing powder, and now I've got my strawberry clusters ready to go. Now, as I mentioned, my color medium of choice is Copic markers. However, if you are inspired to create a card similar to this using images that you can color, use any color medium that you have. It can be alcohol markers, paint, color pencils, any color medium that you have on hand. Now, I am not an expert Copic colorer. I like to watch YouTube videos of other people coloring, and I kind of mimic what they do. Maybe perhaps one day I'll take a class. But what I have learned is I'm starting with a darker color just to add a bit of shading, and then also blending that out with a lighter color. I have no clue where shading goes from a technical standpoint. I just sort of color an image based on what my personal preference is. Now, when I'm doing this type of project, I like to stamp and color all of my elements at once. And so I'll take this on the go, or I'll turn on television or some music and just relax and enjoy the coloring process. Now that my strawberries are all colored, it's now time to fussy cut them out. I personally like buying stamps with a coordinating die so I don't have to fussy cut, particularly if I am having to make a whole bunch of images. But this stamp set did not come with a metal die, so I'm going to go ahead and cut that out, leaving a little bit of a white border around the strawberry bunch, and they are all set to go. Once those images are colored, I set them to the side to work on my sentiment. This die is from Scrapbooking Cards Today. It comes with an outline die as well as the sentiment die, and I'm just going to run it through my tiny little die cutting machine. I love having a smaller machine for this purpose, for smaller dies versus getting out my bigger machine. I'm going to repeat this process with the red cardstock as well, and then I'm going to adhere both of these pieces together to finish out my sentiment. Now that my sentiments are done, it's time to create the background. For the background, I'm using some Catherine Puller smooth white cardstock, and I also grabbed some craft cardstock from my stash. Additionally, I grabbed 2 distress ink colors. One is called Frayed Burlap, and I'm going to use that to stamp on the craft cardstock, and the other one's called Hickory Smoke. And then I have my stamp from Momenta, that's that wood grain background. This is a really great stamp to have in your stash, something similar to it, because if you want wood grain and you don't have wood grain patterned paper, then you can use a stamp and you can create all kinds of wood grain backgrounds. So I'm going to position that on my Misty stamp platform. I do have a little sticky mat from scrapbook.com positioned in there that's holding my paper. I'm going to ink up my stamp and then stamp it down a few times just to make sure I get a good impression. I love the way this frayed burlap looks against this craft cardstock. It's really pretty. I'm going to switch out now to the white smooth cardstock, and this time I'm going to use Hickory Smoke to stamp. And this kind of makes it look like birch wood. Really, it's really, really pretty. I love this stamp, and I will be using this time and time again. And with that, my backgrounds are ready to go. Now it's time to assemble the cards. To the cards, I'm going to add the sentiment, but first I want to make sure that I stamp the sub-sentiment. So I'm going to reach for the stamp set from Hero Arts, and there's a sentiment that says, "Have an extraordinary birthday." I really love the play on words there. So the entire sentiment will say, just a note, have an extraordinary birthday. I'm making sure that that stamp is positioned right side up, because if you're like me, then you may have stamped sentiments upside down a few times. So I want to double check, make sure that's good. I'm going to position that, remove the cardstock sentiment. I'm going to reach for some embossing powder from Spellbinders. This is black embossing powder. I'm going to come in with my powder tool and make sure that I have it nice and powdered up there at the bottom where the sentiment's going to go. I'm going to ink that up using some Versamark. Make sure that's nice and good, and then of course apply my embossing powder and heat that up. Once that sub-sentiment is ready to go, I now can position the strawberries and the just a note sentiment. So I'm going to pop that above the sub-sentiment, and then I'm going to sort of play around with the positioning of the strawberries there at the top of the card. They kind of look like they're hanging down from the top of the card. Once I'm happy with the positioning, I'm going to go ahead and adhere them. I'm using some permanent adhesive from scrapbook.com. I'm also popping up the middle cluster just to give that panel some height and dimension, those elements up there. And notice that the leaves are kind of coming off the panel. That's perfectly okay. Sometimes I don't trim the edge of the panel if I have elements like this, because I kind of like the way that it looks. As long as it fits in the envelope, I'm good to go. I'm going to pop up the sentiment, just a note, with a little bit of foam, again for some more height and dimension, and then position that on the front panel of the card. And I absolutely love the way that that looks. Now, for the second card, I'm using that cardstock, or the craft cardstock panel rather. I'm going to position the cluster of strawberries to the right-hand side, both of them popped up with a little bit of foam. Notice this time I have that sub-sentiment that's stamped going on the horizontal of the card, and then I'm going to bring in the just a note sentiment and get that into position. And lastly, I have some pre-made card bases. This makes card making super fast and easy. I'm going to go ahead and get those folded using my bone folder, and then I'm going to adhere the card panel straight to the card bases. Sometimes I make my own card bases depending on the style of the card that I'm making, or if I have enough time to do so, but these pre-made card bases do come in clutch. And with that, my card project is done. I have 2 top folding cards on the horizontal and 2 side folding cards. These are A2, US A2 size cards. I love the way these look. They're so precious, great for summer, great for birthday, or really any time of the year, actually. All using products from my stash. I had totally forgotten that I had this strawberry stamp, so I'm glad that I found it and put it to use. I hope you are excited for this series. I know that I am, and I hope that you have been inspired to reach in your stash to create fantastic projects. If you want more creative inspiration, make sure you click on the videos there on screen. And stay tuned for more card pairings to come.